The sun was setting over the scrap fields of the outer colony, throwing long shadows across the endless piles of broken machines and discarded containers. The man walked slowly between the rows, his boots crunching against rusted plates and scattered wires. He was not a rich man, nor even an average one. His clothes were torn at the edges, his hands calloused from years of small jobs that never paid enough, and his pocket carried only 2 coins left from a week of hard survival. To him, 2 coins meant a cheap meal, maybe a place to sleep for one night. But hunger had taught him long ago that opportunities never came when expected. He stopped when he saw it. Half buried under rusted hulls and crushed starship wings, an old space container, square and heavy, its surface marked with faded alien symbols. The container looked older than the colony itself, dust sticking to it as though it had not been touched in decades. Its hinges were broken and one side was dented, but there was something strange about it. Unlike the other containers, this one hummed faintly, as if some hidden machine inside was still alive. The man knelt closer, brushing the dust with his rough hands. No one else seemed to notice it. Around him, traders and scavengers shouted prices for scrap metal, while children picked apart old circuits. An old junk dealer leaned against a broken speeder nearby, smoking something foul and watching him. 2 credits, the dealer said without waiting for him to ask. His tone was mocking, as if he wanted to make the man laugh at himself for even considering it. 2 credits and the cursed box is yours. Been here for years. No one wants it. The man looked at his coins, then at the container. Hunger bit his stomach. Logic told him to walk away and buy food, but the hum inside the container refused to leave his ears. It was weak but steady, as though it was calling to him, whispering through the air that it held something more valuable than anything in the scrap fields. He handed the 2 coins to the dealer. The old man chuckled, shaking his head as if he had just won a joke. "Enjoy your trash," he said, pocketing the money. The man pulled and dragged the container free from the piles around it. It was heavier than it looked, metal grinding as he moved it inch by inch. Sweat covered his face, but his eyes stayed sharp. No one else cared to watch. No one expected him to find anything more than rust and dust inside. That thought gave him strength, because for the first time in years he felt like he had made a choice not of survival, but of fate. He brought the container back to his small shed at the edge of the colony. The place was nothing more than 4 walls of sheet metal, a weak roof, and a table with broken legs. But inside, away from the eyes of scavengers, he could finally look at what he had bought. He stared at the container under the dim light of a flickering lamp. The hum was clearer now, vibrating faintly against his skin. He could feel warmth seeping from the cracks in its surface like a heartbeat buried deep within. For hours he studied the lock. It was alien, old, and broken in ways that made no sense. It was neither human design nor one of the common galactic races he knew of. Strange patterns twisted around the edges, almost like living scars etched into the metal. Finally, with a sharp tool and steady force, he broke through the seal. The container hissed as stale air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of dust, metal, and something sweet yet sharp, like flowers growing in forgotten soil. Inside, he saw light. Not the reflection of metal, but a faint glow that illuminated his entire shed. His heart pounded as he leaned closer. What he saw was impossible. Rows of glass-like pods shaped in strange curves filled the interior. Each pod was covered in frost, glowing softly from within, and in each one a shape was visible. His breath caught in his throat as he realized they were not machines, nor parts, nor weapons. They were bodies. 8 figures lay inside the pods, perfectly still as if trapped between sleep and death. They were not human, and yet they were not monstrous either. Their forms were slender, elegant, beautiful in ways his mind could not fully grasp. Long hair floated inside the pods as if suspended in water, faces calm and peaceful. Their skin shimmered faintly with strange patterns like stars written across flesh. He stumbled back, his hands trembling. 8 alien women, asleep inside an old container bought for 2 credits. His mind screamed at him to close the box, to pretend he had never seen it, but his eyes refused to move away. He had lived a life of emptiness, scraping by one day at a time, but now the universe had delivered something to his hands that no man should ever own. As he stared, one of the pods flickered. The glow grew brighter, and for a brief moment a pair of alien eyes fluttered open, glowing like twin suns in the darkness. The man froze, his breath caught in his chest, his entire world shifting in that single second. The hum that had followed him since the junkyard grew louder, filling his shed with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. He did not know if this was a gift, a curse, or the start of something that would consume him. All he knew was that the 2 credits he had spent had bought him something beyond imagination, something that the galaxy itself might come searching for. And as the pod lights began to pulse, one after another, he understood one thing clearly. His life of quiet survival had ended the moment he touched that container. Now he was standing at the edge of a storm that he could not yet see. The night was long and heavy inside the man's shed. The air carried a silence that felt unnatural, broken only by the faint hum of the pods resting inside the container. He sat on the floor, his back against the weak wall, unable to take his eyes off what he had found. His mind told him to run, to alert someone, maybe sell the discovery for more money than he could ever dream of. But his heart, stubborn and wild, told him to stay. This was his secret, his gamble, and for now it belonged to him. The pods glowed faintly, their surfaces coated with frost that caught the dim light. Each figure inside looked unreal, as though sculpted by hands not meant for mortals. Their beauty was cold and distant, yet it reached him in ways he could not understand. He saw skin that shimmered faintly with colors not found on Earth, hair that moved as if caught in unseen currents, and faces too perfect for reality. There were 8 of them, all different, and yet each one radiated an energy that made his chest tighten. He moved closer, pressing his hand against one of the pods. The surface was warm, smooth, almost alive. The hum grew louder under his touch, and for a second he thought he felt a pulse. His breath quickened. These were not corpses. They were not relics. They were alive, trapped in a sleep that had lasted longer than he could imagine. His mind raced with questions. Who had put them here? Why abandon them in a junkyard? And what would happen if they woke? Hours passed as he studied them. The first pod held a tall figure with long silver hair, her eyes shut but her expression calm, like a queen resting after battle. The second one was smaller, her frame fragile with markings across her arms that glowed faintly even through the frost. The third had hair like fire, red and gold strands drifting in the liquid that held her. The fourth wore faint traces of armor over her chest, as if she had been a warrior even in sleep. Each one carried a story written across their features, and yet none of it made sense. The man whispered to himself, his voice breaking the silence. Who are you? He did not expect an answer, but the hum from the container seemed to respond, rising faintly, then fading again. It was enough to make him step back, his heart hammering. He realized then that he had crossed a line. He was no longer a scavenger who bought a useless container. He was now a keeper of something far greater, something dangerous. His stomach growled, reminding him of the meal he had lost by spending those 2 credits. Yet the hunger no longer mattered. He had forgotten the emptiness in his body, replaced now with the weight of the secret in front of him. He had no plan, no way of knowing what to do next. All he knew was that he could not show this to anyone. The colony was filled with greedy eyes and quick hands. If anyone saw what lay inside, he would lose them, or worse, they would all be destroyed. The lamp flickered, and in that brief darkness, the shed felt alive. He swore he heard whispers, faint voices carried on the air, but when the light returned, the only sound was the steady hum. He rubbed his eyes, wondering if sleep was playing tricks on him. Still, the feeling lingered. He was not alone, not truly. As the hours crawled forward, something changed. The frost on the pods began to thin, melting into droplets that ran down the glass. The glow from within grew brighter, filling the shed with strange colors, painting his skin in shades of blue, green, and gold. He stumbled back, staring in disbelief. One by one, the pods seemed to stir, as if the presence of a living soul so near had awoken them from their endless slumber. He gripped a piece of metal pipe from the corner of the room, his only form of defense. His hands shook, not from the weapon's weight, but from the terror crawling up his spine. If they awoke hostile, if they carried powers beyond his control, there would be nothing he could do. Yet he could not look away. His eyes were fixed on the first pod as cracks formed across the glass surface, thin lines spreading like veins. With a sharp hiss, the pod released steam, filling the room with a mist that shimmered in the colored light. The man coughed, waving his hand to clear the air, his heart beating loud enough to drown out the hum. Then he saw her eyes open. 2 glowing orbs, golden and deep, locked onto him through the mist. For a moment, time stopped. She blinked slowly, her gaze sharp yet calm, like a predator studying prey. His breath caught in his chest, He wanted to run, but his legs refused. He wanted to speak, but no words came. The other pods pulsed, their lights growing brighter as though answering the first. He realized then that this was only the beginning. One had awakened, and the rest would soon follow. The hum turned into a rhythm, a low vibration that shook the walls of the shed. The man dropped the pipe, his knees weak. He felt a pull, invisible and powerful, dragging him closer to the pods. It was not force, but something deeper, as if his soul was being called. The alien girl inside the first pod pressed her hand against the glass, her glowing eyes never leaving his. He raised his own hand without thinking, placing it on the same spot. The warmth that surged through his skin was unlike anything he had felt. It was not pain, not fear, it was connection. A link formed in that single moment, binding him to her and perhaps to all of them. He whispered again, this time barely audible. "What are you?" The glass cracked louder, a sharp sound that echoed across the room. Steam poured out, filling the shed in a glowing mist. The man stumbled back, his body trembling, his mind screaming that he had opened something that should have never been touched. And yet deep inside, a part of him knew he would never turn away. 8 alien beauties lay before him, and their awakening had only just begun. The shed groaned under the weight of silence, broken only by the hiss of steam that curled across the floor like living fog. The man stood frozen in the dim glow of the pods, his chest rising and falling too fast. His eyes locked on the first alien girl whose gaze had already pierced through him. Her pod cracked again, a sharp sound that made his skin crawl, and then with a final shudder the glass split apart. Warm mist spilled into the room, carrying with it a sweet and strange scent, like flowers from a world that had never been touched by human hands. She stepped forward slowly, her feet bare, her silver hair spilling over her shoulders as if each strand carried its own faint light. Her eyes glowed like molten gold, unblinking, focused entirely on him. The man's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to demand answers, but no words came. She tilted her head, studying him, her expression unreadable. For a moment he wondered if she even understood what she was looking at. Then her lips parted. The sound that left her mouth was not human, not any language he had ever heard, but it was filled with music and power, vibrating through the shed as though the air itself bent to her will. He felt it in his chest, a resonance that threatened to pull him apart, yet it was not cruel. It was searching. Her voice lowered, and though he could not understand the words, he knew what she was asking. She wanted to know who he was, why he had woken her, and what fate he carried in his trembling hands. He whispered his name, almost ashamed of how weak it sounded. She blinked, her glowing eyes softening, and then she reached out. Her hand touched his cheek, warm and delicate, and in that instant images crashed into his mind. He saw stars collapsing, fleets burning, worlds screaming in silence. He saw her standing at the center of it all, a warrior, a prisoner, a goddess among ruins. His knees buckled, but her hand held him steady. The connection broke as quickly as it began, leaving him gasping for air. Before he could recover, the other pods stirred. One by one, their glow intensified, colors flashing like lightning trapped in glass. The shed shook, the weak walls rattling as though a storm had descended. The man stumbled back, pressing himself against the wall, his eyes wide as the second pod burst open with a hiss. A smaller figure emerged, her skin marked with glowing patterns that shifted like rivers of light across her arms and neck. She stumbled, weak at first, but the first alien reached out to steady her, their eyes meeting with recognition deeper than family. The third pod cracked open next, releasing a figure whose hair burned with strands of red and gold. Heat spread through the shed as she stepped forward, her eyes like embers, her breath steaming in the air. She looked at the man with suspicion, her hands curling into fists that shimmered with faint fire. The man's heart pounded. If she chose to strike, his shed and everything inside it would be ash in seconds. But the first alien raised her hand, a silent command, and the fiery one lowered her fists reluctantly. The fourth pod shattered in a spray of shards, revealing a warrior with fragments of alien armor still clinging to her body. She moved with strength, her posture rigid, her eyes sharp and cold. Her gaze swept the room, and when it landed on the man, it lingered. She said nothing, but her jaw tightened as if she already judged him unworthy. The man clenched his fists, refusing to look away. The shed was alive now, filled with the light and presence of beings that no human had ever stood so close to. One after another, the pods opened, each revealing another beauty with her own aura, her own strangeness, her own unearthly presence. 8 in total, standing together, their glowing eyes piercing through the mist. They spoke to one another in their alien tongue, voices weaving into music both haunting and beautiful. He could not understand their words, but he could feel the weight of them. They were deciding, then, as if agreeing, they turned to him. 8 pairs of eyes burning with light and power, fixed on the man who had bought their prison for 2 credits. His chest tightened. He had lived invisible, forgotten by the galaxy, and now he was the center of a gaze that could break worlds. The first alien stepped closer again. This time her voice was softer, clearer, as though she was shaping it to reach him. Her words bent, twisted, then resolved into something he could finally understand. You freed us. Now you are bound to us. The man's breath caught. Bound. The word echoed in his mind. He had not saved them for charity or profit. By opening the container, he had tied his life to theirs. He looked at them, their beauty overwhelming, their presence suffocating, and he realized he could not escape. Not now, not ever. His heart pounded as the fiery one stepped closer, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. He is weak, she said, her words broken but understandable. The warrior beside her nodded. The others whispered among themselves, their alien voices sharp and quick. The man's hands trembled, but he stood tall, forcing himself to meet their judgment. The first alien raised her hand, silencing them. Her eyes softened again as she looked at him. Weak, but chosen, she said, her voice carrying weight that silenced even the fiery one. The man swallowed hard. He had not chosen this fate, yet it was now his. He was no longer a scavenger with empty pockets. He was the keeper of 8 alien beings whose pasts carried wars and secrets beyond imagination. The shed felt too small for them, the air too heavy, the silence too sharp. His life had ended with the turn of a lock, and a new one had begun, one that might cost him more than he could ever pay. And as the 8 stood together, their eyes glowing in unison, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The galaxy would not let them remain hidden for long. The dawn broke cold over the colony, but the man's shed no longer felt like part of that world. The air inside carried heat and light that should not exist, and the presence of the 8 alien women turned the broken walls into something closer to a shrine than a shelter. The man had not slept. His eyes burned with exhaustion, but his body refused to rest. For every time he closed his eyes, he saw visions. Fleets burning in silence, alien empires rising and collapsing, voices chanting in a language that pressed against his skull like thunder. He knew those visions were not dreams. They were fragments leaking from the ones he had awakened. The 8 moved slowly in his space, graceful even in their weakness. They spoke among themselves in a flowing language that made his bones hum. But sometimes a word slipped through in broken human tongue. Weak, chosen, master, prison. Their voices tangled like threads he could not untie, but he understood enough to know he was at the center of their fate now, whether he wanted to be or not. The man had thought the colony would not notice. He had hoped his shed, forgotten at the edge of the scrap fields, would keep him hidden, but secrets this large never stayed buried. The first whispers spread at the junkyard itself. The dealer who sold him the container could not keep his mouth shut. He had laughed at first, boasting that some fool had wasted 2 credits on cursed trash, but when he noticed the man never returned to buy food, when he realized the shed had begun to glow faintly in the night, his laughter turned into stories told to hungry ears. And in colonies like this, stories traveled faster than ships. By the time the sun reached its peak, strangers were already watching the shed. A shadow moved between the rusted hulls, too still to be a scavenger. Another figure loitered near the trading stalls, pretending to sort metal, but keeping his eyes fixed on the man's path. He felt it, the way prey feels the predator's breath before the teeth sink in. His skin prickled with warning. They were being hunted. The alien sensed it too. The fiery one growled low when she caught sight of shapes outside, her fists lighting faintly with embers. The warrior pressed her palm to the wall, her glowing eyes narrowing, her body rigid as though ready for battle. The smallest one trembled, clutching at the silver-haired leader's arm, her glowing patterns flickering like frightened fireflies. The man's chest grew heavy. He had no weapons, no allies, nothing but a shed ready to collapse if pressed too hard. Yet they all looked at him waiting, as though his choice mattered more than theirs. The first alien, the one with golden eyes, stepped forward. She placed her hand on his chest, and again he felt that surge of warmth that carried weight beyond his understanding. "They come," she whispered. Her voice was calm, but beneath it was a storm. That night the hunt revealed itself. A black ship, sleek and silent, descended beyond the scrap fields. Its hull bore no markings, its engines muted, designed not for trade or travel but for capture. From its belly spilled hunters in dark armor, their movements precise, their weapons humming faintly with energy. These were not scavengers. They were professionals, men who hunted rare life and sold it to the highest bidder. They moved like wolves, and they had already caught the scent. The man's heart thundered as he watched their shadows stretch across the ground. The aliens gathered behind him, their glowing eyes fierce but their bodies weak, still unsteady from centuries of slumber. They whispered to one another, sharp words that crackled in the air. He caught fragments that chilled him. Taken before. Never again. Fight. The hunters closed in, their leader raising a scanner that pulsed with light. The device beeped, and the man realized with dread that the hum of the pods had never stopped. It had called them just as it had called him. His gamble had not only bought him the aliens, it had painted a target on his back. The fiery one stepped forward, her body trembling with power she could barely contain. Flames licked at her hands, sparks falling to the floor. The warrior moved beside her, pulling the shattered remnants of her armor tight against her skin, ready to strike. The others gathered, their glowing eyes fixed on the door. The man gripped the metal pipe again, his only weapon, his hands slick with sweat. He knew he could not fight soldiers trained for blood. He could barely fight hunger, yet something inside him refused to cower. He stood in front of the door, his body between the hunters and the aliens, as if his thin frame could hold back the storm. The shed shook as the first blow landed, a steel boot crashing against the door. The man's breath caught, but he did not move. The aliens behind him began to chant in unison, their voices weaving into a sound that shook his very bones. Light spilled from their eyes, from their skin, from the cracks in the walls, filling the shed with a radiance that turned night into day. The hunters outside shouted, raising their weapons, their scanners screaming with overload. The second blow cracked the door. The third ripped it open. Soldiers stormed inside, black armor gleaming, weapons raised. For a heartbeat, everything was still. The hunters staring at the 8 glowing figures. The man clutching his pipe, his heart frozen in his chest. Then the world exploded. The fiery one unleashed her flames, a torrent of heat that roared like a beast, hurling hunters back into the dirt. The warrior charged, her hands slicing through armor like paper, her strength fueled by fury and memory. The others followed, each releasing fragments of power too strange for the man to name. Light bending, sound breaking, shadows twisting into blades. The shed collapsed in the chaos, its weak walls crumbling under the storm. The man was dragged to his knees, his body battered by the shock waves, but his eyes never left them. The 8 were no longer fragile figures in glass. They were forces, storms wrapped in beauty, unleashed at last. When the last hunter fell, silence returned. The ground burned, the air thick with smoke. The black ship, crippled, rose shakily into the sky before vanishing into the void, leaving its dead behind. The man stood slowly, his body shaking, his shed reduced to ash. The aliens gathered around him, their glowing eyes soft now, their breathing heavy. They had fought not only for themselves, but for him. The first alien spoke, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "Now the galaxy knows," she said. Her words chilled him more than the night air. Because she was right. The hunt had only just begun. The night after the battle was silent, but it was not peace. The colony lay beyond the horizon, unaware that its edge had already become the stage for something larger than it could ever hold. The man stood among the ruins of his shed, his chest heavy with the weight of smoke and fear. Around him, the 8 aliens rested, their bodies still glowing faintly in the dark. They had unleashed storms against the hunters, but their strength was not endless. Even now their breathing was deep, controlled, the rhythm of warriors recovering from wounds far older than the colony itself. The man felt small in their presence, smaller than he had ever felt in the long years of poverty and hunger. He was not a soldier, not a leader, not even a man of worth. He had spent 2 credits on a container because he had nothing else to lose. And now he stood between 8 beings who carried power greater than fleets. His heart beat with dread and with something else he could not name, something sharp and unshakable. When the first alien with golden eyes turned to him, he felt his breath leave his chest. She spoke softly, but the weight of her words pressed against him. "You chose," she said. The man shook his head, his voice breaking. "I did not choose. I bought a box. I wanted a chance, but not this." Her gaze never wavered. "Fate chose through you. The hunters know now. The galaxy will know soon. They will not stop. The fiery one stepped closer, her arms crossed, her eyes still burning like embers. "We cannot hide," she said. Her words were rough, broken, but sharp with truth. "They come again. Stronger." The warrior nodded, her expression cold. "He is weak, but he stands." He stood before the storm with nothing. "That is not weakness. That is will." The others whispered in their alien tongue, their voices weaving a harmony that chilled him. He understood none of the words, but the meaning pressed into his bones. They were bound to him now through the lock he had broken, through the choice he had claimed and denied at once. The man sat on the ground, his hands covering his face. He had lived his whole life avoiding attention, slipping between shadows, taking whatever scraps the colony gave him. Now he was marked, hunted, tied to beings whose beauty and power made him tremble. He wanted to scream, to run, to sell them off to the highest bidder and buy peace. Yet when he thought of the hunters dragging them away, of the fiery one shackled, of the smallest one crying in fear, his stomach turned. He knew he could not betray them. The silver-haired alien knelt before him, her hand gentle on his shoulder. "Choice is not always freedom," she whispered. "Sometimes it is burden, but burden shapes destiny." The man lifted his head. Their eyes glowed around him. 8 pairs watching, waiting. He swallowed hard. "If I stay with you, the hunters will come. More ships, armies, they will burn the colony. They will kill me." The fiery one leaned forward, her voice sharp. "If you leave, they kill us. They kill you too. No escape." The words struck him with cruel clarity. His path had split, but both roads circled back to the same storm. He could not undo the lock. He could not close the container. He could not go back to hunger and shadows. The only way forward was into fire. As the night deepened, the aliens spoke of their past, their voices weaving fragments of memory. They had been taken in war, prisoners locked in eternal sleep, hidden away in a container when their captors fell. They had slept for centuries, waiting for hands to break their prison. The man listened, his chest tight. They were not just beautiful figures. They were weapons, symbols, secrets that empires would kill to possess. At dawn, the horizon burned faintly with the glow of engines. The man stiffened, his eyes catching the shapes of ships moving far beyond the colony. The hunters had called others. Or perhaps the empire that once owned the container had awoken to reclaim its treasure. His heart pounded as he realized the truth. This was no longer his secret. The galaxy was already turning its gaze toward him. The aliens gathered around him, their glowing eyes sharp. The leader spoke again. "You have choice. Stand with us and we fight. Run and we are taken and you die anyway. Stand and you may live. And if you fall with meaning." The man's body shook, not with fear this time, but with the weight of decision. He had lived a life where his choices meant nothing. Now a choice stood before him that could shape the fate of worlds. His mouth was dry, his voice broken, but he spoke. "Then I will stand." The fiery one smiled faintly for the first time without scorn. The warrior bowed her head. The smallest one reached for his arm, her glowing patterns flickering like soft light in the dark. The silver-haired leader's gaze softened. "Then you are ours," she said. "And we are yours." The man felt the weight settle over him, heavy yet fierce. He was no soldier, no leader, but in that moment he was bound to them. His 2-coin gamble had ended the life he knew and opened the gates to a war he could not yet see. Beyond the horizon, ships drew nearer, their engines glowing brighter. The hunt was not over. It was only the beginning.